Hi everyone, Monica here. So our last video was an introduction into foundation paper piecing, or FPP as it's also known. Foundation paper piecing is a great way to make super accurate patchwork blocks. It starts with a paper template that has a patchwork block design printed onto it. When you make the block, you sew exactly on the lines. The paper stabilizes the fabric and you end up with blocks that finish the correct size with perfect points. Now there's always more than one way to do something, and if you happen to not like that part where you have to tear the paper away at the end, well, you may like the method that I'm going to show in this video. So it's a no-tear foundation paper piecing method. To demonstrate this method, I'm going to use the templates from the square and a star block from the part 8 of Time to Bloom. This block is made up of a foundation paper piece square and a square that's in the middle, 4 sets of star points that are also foundation paper pieced, and 4 quarter log cabin blocks that are made in the regular way. Here are the pieces all cut out and ready to sew. You'll notice that some of the squares have been cut once on the diagonal and others have been cut twice on the diagonal to make smaller triangles. Now I just wanted to mention that you can also use freezer paper for this method. I didn't happen to have any freezer paper on hand, so I'm just using regular printer paper, which works just as well. So let's get started. So print out your templates, ticking the actual size box. Just print out one of each to begin with and then measure them. So template A should measure 4 inches by 7.5 inches, and template B should measure a 7.5 inches square. Now, if they've printed out the right size, you can go ahead and print another 3 of template A. So that's our star points, and we need 4 of those in total. So cut each template out, cutting slightly outside the outer line. So I like to make that about 1/8 of an inch bigger, all the way around the edge. Now there's 2 ways that you can do this next step. You can either roll over each line with a tracing wheel in the same way that I showed in the last video, or you can fold on each of the lines. So first of all, let's roll over the lines, and I always like to use the wrong side of an older cutting mat because I don't want to leave the holes in the paper. And it's just a matter of using a tracing wheel and just accurately tracing over each line. So trace each line and you're going edge to edge on the template, so all the way to the edge on each line, even if that's not marked on the template. So the tracing wheel will make perforated lines on the back of the paper, and it just makes it really easy to fold back on those lines. Now if you don't have a tracing wheel, you can also just fold on the lines. So you can either just fold those, just looking at the line and folding, or to make it a little bit easier, if you've got a thin plastic ruler, this is one that I had that I took out of a diary, but some people also like to use X-ray plastic or something that's as thin as a credit card. And all you have to do is just place your thin plastic ruler on the marked line and then just fold the paper over it. So it just makes it a little bit easier to be nice and accurate with the lines. So just go ahead and just crease all of the lines, just in the same way that I did with the tracing wheel, only we're making creases instead. So personally, I've got to say that the tracing wheel is more accurate. That's just my personal opinion. And if you are going to get into foundation paper piecing, I do recommend getting a tracing wheel. It's a great tool to add to your toolkit. So go ahead and trace over each line of every template with a tracing wheel, or go and fold those lines and make creases just in the same way that I showed before. So let's get started with template A, and I just want to note that all of the fabrics in the cutting instructions, they're cut slightly larger just to allow for trimming as we go. And with most foundation paper piece patterns, you're normally just working with scraps of fabric and trimming them as you go. However, with template A, we have to start with a square in the middle, and the square is exactly the right size that we need, so it's 3 inches, and I could have worked out a larger size, but we had a 3-inch strip left from another block that we did, so I thought let's try and save as much fabric as we can. So this is an exact size that we need. So what I want you to do just before you get started is flip the template over to the wrong side, and you may have creased or you have rolled over with the tracing wheel. So you'll be able to see that center square, which is now a diamond because it's set on point. And we're going to mark a 1/4 inch line outside that center square or diamond shape. So just use the lines on your ruler and just mark that line around the outside edge. So 1/4 inch outside that diamond. So the next thing you're going to need is a craft glue stick. Just make sure that it's washable, non-toxic and acid-free. And we're just going to take this and we'll just put a few swipes on the paper just to hold that center square in place. There we go, and we're popping that on with the right side of the fabric facing up. So remember in last month's video, I showed that the blank side of the paper is going to be the right side of the block. So the fabric's facing right side up on the blank side of the paper. I think that's right.
Got there in the end.
I did. Oh, and one more thing just before we get started. The medium square, that's piece number 1. So just turn the template over and just find where piece number 2 is. So that's a background triangle. And I just want you to write on that number 2 there. That's going to help us get started. And position that on your cutting mat or just on your work surface with the number 2 in the top right hand corner, just above our square. Now take a small triangle. So this is one of our triangles that was, it started with a square that was cut twice on the diagonal. And place that just above our center square. Okay, so now we're taking that triangle, we're just going to place it next to it so we can see, okay, that's where it goes, that's the same shape. And you'll know that you have it placed correctly if you just pull on the top edge of that, and that is the solid grain. So we have a bias grain on this edge and on this edge, but we want that solid grain across the top edge. So just position that like that. Once you know that you have it positioned correctly, you can then place it right sides together with our diamond, making sure that this bottom edge here is nice and square and level. All the pieces are level basically. So I'm now going to just hang on to all of those pieces together, keeping that triangle in the place where I want it to be. And I'm just going to bring it over to the sewing machine and flip it upside down. And then I'm going to fold back on line A and I'm going to sew next to line A. So rather than sewing through the paper, I've folded back on line A because we're going to sew next to line A. And to do this, I just have my machine set up in the regular way for piecing, just size 70 needle and a stitch length of 2. And I've got my regular foot on this time because it's got a little line in the center there. And I'm going to put that little line, I'm going to rest that on the edge of the paper. So I'm just going to start again, and this time I'm actually going to start with a leader, sewing exactly next to the line. And while I'm using leaders and enders, I'm just going to finish off on one. Okay, so now I'm going to open that up and then I'm going to turn to the blank side and open out that triangle. And the most important thing is that that triangle covers, you can see all of that triangle underneath, and I also need some 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's head to the iron and give that a press. So set the seam and then open that piece out, give that a bit of a finger press and then press, and that will just make sure that no tiny creases are pressed into the seam. So back at the cutting mat, turn back to the printed side of the template and fold back on line B. So our next piece is going to be a background, and that's number 3, and that's going to be another small background triangle. So just fold back on line B and trim back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we don't have much to trim because our blue square was the right size to begin with, but there is that little excess corner piece there to trim off. So open out and then turn back to the blank side. Now take that small background triangle and place that just in position where it needs to go, so we can see that we have our straight grain edge across the top. We have our bias edges on the sides, and it's just a matter now of, whoops, get rid of that thread there. It's just a matter of placing it right sides together, making sure that this square edge here is all lined up, and we're going to have a bit of a triangle extending over the edge there like that, and then hang on to all of the pieces, and let's head to the sewing machine. Here we are. So we're going to fold back on line B, just like that, and then we're going to sew next to the paper all the way down. So exactly next to the paper. So we're just sewing all the way from the top of the template. And that fold of the paper helps you to sew nice and straight. So you can see here, sewing exactly next to the edge of the paper. Okay, so let's head back to the iron. Set the seam, open out the triangle, give that a finger crease, make sure that it's covering all of its space. It's great if it goes a little bit outside our paper template, and then give that a press. So you can hold that up to the light just to double check that it's covering all of our piece and also giving us a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So turn back to the printed side, fold back on line C, and trim the excess fabric back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So everything's looking quite good there. There's only a fraction to trim. Now we're going to turn to the blank side, and our next piece is a dark piece, a dark triangle. So just sort of place that there. You can see that that's going to fit there nicely, and we have our straight grain this time on the side and across the bottom edge. That's our bias grain there, but just place that right sides together with our other pieces and just center this piece. Make sure that you've got about the same amount extending past each edge. And now let's hang on to all the pieces and head to the machine to sew. Now fold back on line C. And at this stage here, you can see if your fabric has moved a little bit, so you can just bring those edges back together as best as possible, like that. And once again, we're just going to sew next to the edge of the folded paper. Now you don't have to finish with the leader and ender, that's just something that I'm doing. You can do it if you want to. Okay, so back over here, and I just wanted to show another little tip. Some people don't actually use an iron, they just fold it over and you use a little fabric roller just to make sure that the fabric is nice and flat. Either way works well. There we are. I think this is what we're looking at here. There's one star point. We have our diamond, we've got our background fabric and one star point. So let's flip back over to the printed side of the paper, and now we want to fold back on line D. I obviously went a little bit too overboard with my glue, so make sure that you don't glue in the seam allowance. It's good to learn by my mistakes. And now just trimming away the excess fabric, trimming back to that 1/4 inch. Pretty much is a 1/4 inch. We're just trimming off that extra little bit there, opening it out, flipping it back over, and taking another large dark triangle. These are our star points. Just making sure that's positioned correctly, placing it right sides together, centering it so we have like an even amount extending over all edges, and hanging on to that while we head to the sewing machine. Okay, so now we're just going to flip back on line D like that. As I said, make sure you don't glue in the seam allowance. And now we're right to sew. You'll find sometimes that if you do accidentally stitch the paper, that it will just still pull away nicely. There won't be a problem. And back to the ironing board to press. And here's our star points with a diamond in the center. And the last step is to trim on the outside line. And now pull the paper away.
What happens to the square that's got the glue on it?
Well, once you just pick those little bits of paper off, the remaining glue will just wash away when you wash your quilt. So go ahead and make a total of 4 of template A. I just made another one where I stitched through the paper just in the same way that I showed last week. And when you do that, see, it's just a matter of tearing the paper away. So it's about just working out which way suits you the best. And that was probably my son sending me a text message. So now it's time to make template B. I've got a little tip to show you, and I'm also going to make this one using the no tear paper method because that's what this video is all about. This is template B, and I've already rolled over the lines with a tracing wheel. And now I'm just going to turn it to the blank side because we know that the blank side is the right side. And here's my piece of fabric. It starts with a background square in the middle. Now this square is plenty big enough, and just so that I know that I have it perfectly kind of like centered over that center square, I'm going to use a light box. So see how the line is showing through. And now I'm just going to start with a couple of dabs of glue. Once again, I'm going to try my Sewline glue pen. Make sure that you only just do a couple of dabs in the corners and make sure that you stay inside that square. And here I am putting the right side down. As I said, I have plenty of space around the outside of that inner square. So now we're just going to work in the same way. It's just a matter of folding back on line A, and then we're going to trim our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And our first one is a dark triangle. So we have plenty of fabric with these triangles. It was just easier to cut them the same size as the triangles that we needed in these pieces here. So there's plenty of space, a little bit of wastage, but as I said, it was just easier to cut them all the same size. So now we're just going to flip that over to the wrong side. We're going to place this one right sides together with our edge that we just trimmed. And then it's a matter of just holding those pieces, heading to the sewing machine, and this is just repeating the whole process again. When complete, go ahead and trim on the line. Now just go ahead and remove the paper. And I think I'm going to have to say that my Sewline glue pen was the better glue to use. So the next step is to make the quarter log cabin units. These are made in the regular way, just in the same way that we've shown before. Now that all units are complete, it's time for the fun part. It's time to lay the units out to form the square and a star block. Separate the pieces into 3 rows and join together, and then join the 3 rows together. Next step is to sew on the borders, then layer it together with the batting and backing, and quilt. And you'll find the quilting instructions in the course notes. So that's how you do foundation paper piecing using a method where you don't have to tear the paper away. As mentioned, you can also use freezer paper when using this particular method. So if you've got any tips that you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments. We always love to read the comments, and hope you enjoy this tutorial. Thanks for watching. Bye.